Welcome, everyone. It's a great privilege today to be with Donna DIngillo, who is the director of the Institute of Christ Consciousness and the author of what I believe is an historical first and a book that is quite appropriate uh, in now the month of March 2023, which is the month Women's History Month, and that is a book on Jesus's women apostles, and it's a book entitled "The Women Who Loved Jesus: The Untold Story of the Women's Evangelistic Core." And we were discussing before airtime whether you had planned to release it during Women's History Month, because I thought it was such a synchronicity. And perhaps you want to share that. Had you planned that?
Hi, Alfred, and hello to all you people listening to this podcast. And to answer your question, no, that was not necessarily intentional, but as you said, very synchronistic and serendipitous. So I'm not in control of this book. I'm just the conduit through this message is being portrayed. And this is up to the higher spiritual helpers seeding this into the planet now that are in kind of a distribution mode of how this message gets put across to the world.
Right. Well, is this a first book on Jesus's women apostles? Is there some other book on this subject?
As far as I know, the only mention that I came across about these women apostles that Jesus commissioned during his public ministry is recounted briefly in this beautiful 2,100-page revelatory text called the Urantia Book. The Urantia Book has a very broad picture of the scope of reality. And in part 4, the life and teachings of Jesus, which go into every year of Jesus' personal life, and then a very expanded account of his public ministry. This story is briefly outlined, identifying who the 12 women were and a little bit about why Jesus commissioned them as his female apostles. Jesus loved women. And in the earlier part of the Urantia Book, when Jesus was growing up, he did not understand why women were segregated from the men in the synagogue, and he did not understand why women did not have the same social status as men did. So this was his attempt to bring about a recognition of women being equal to women as being equal to God in the eyes. I'm saying that wrong. Sorry. Women being equal to men in the eyes of God. And this was a very bold step that he took. And even the male apostles, which is recounted in this story in the Urantia Book, were very shocked by what he did. But the women were very much energized by this, not only the 12 that he commissioned, but the other women that saw what he was doing and gave them what you might call restore their divine dignity to be women. So this was a very, very big move that Jesus made. And there is very little account in the Gospels about them. I don't think there's any mention of them other than the fact that women were regarded as deaconesses in the early Christian church. But these women formed the social foundation for the believers of Jesus that later evolved into the Christian church. And these women, in their accounts, they say they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know that they were establishing a social network that would later springboard this broader new religion growing called Christianity. They just loved Jesus, and he touched their lives so deeply that they wanted to devote their lives to serving humanity and bringing back that love that Jesus evoked in them to help other people feel that love for themselves and for one another. So this is basically the true foundation of the gospel, which is very simply faith in God and loving service to humanity. And that is a very different approach to the gospel that what later evolved into the Christian gospel message. And now they want us to return back to this more simpler approach to Jesus' original gospel.
Right. You know, I found reading the book myself, which I encourage everyone who's watching this to really download and read it, and you'll have a link. Those who are watching this program, you can obtain it at the website of the Institute of Christ Consciousness, but it provides a deep transformational version or picture of what was really occurring in early Christianity, and very different from what those of us who grew up in sort of the traditional church learned. And perhaps you can amplify on that. And
I agree. It is a very different approach. I think that back in the time of when we were growing up in the Christian church, that there was still a very male patriarchal language that was being used in terms of conceptual frames of reference to who and what Jesus is or was. And now in this modern day and age, as we see women kind of coming back into the fore, taking more of a leadership position in the corridors of our social institutions, that it is very important now for the religious institution to also recognize that women have a role to play as ministers of the gospel of Jesus. It can be a different approach than the men. The male gospels were more of the teachers and the preachers. The women were the social gatherers. They provided that strong social network for deep inner healing to be conducted by their efforts and the ministry of healing that Jesus trained them to share with other people. And this is a very deep level of spiritual healing that supersedes, it should not supplant certain theological concepts, but it should also be considered as an important and sometimes even superseding the intellectual approach, because the way Jesus approached them was at a soul level. He touched their soul. He liberated their souls so these women could begin to feel who they were at a fundamental core level of their own personhood as daughters of God. And so this is a very different approach that is not, I still think, still to this day, not really emphasized within the Christian church. And this is one of the reasons that this is now coming back at this time, 2,000 years later, because it is time for women to take their rightful place as spiritual leaders in all of the social areas of our planetary culture.
could you sort of recreate for us the role that women had, say, when Jesus was, touring the countryside, what women were doing? I mean, just briefly you had the men, but you had the women also at
Well,
that time, didn't you?
yeah. Well, are you asking me about the 12 women or the role of women in general?
These 12 women, because I believe that he inaugurated, or if that's the right word, 10 of them, and then added 2 of them, and those were the 12 apostles, women apostles, and the men were shocked at that point, and yeah, so take it from there.
They really stepped out of the confines of tradition. In those days, women in pretty much all areas of social life were regarded as second-class citizens. They did not have, and I may be wrong about this because I'm not a scholar of antiquity, but they could not vote, hold property. Maybe Roman women could, but I don't think that Jewish women could. And then, of course, they were very much under the authoritative control of their fathers or their husbands. Women's behaviors were very much regulated. And so Jesus emboldened them, empowered them to step beyond the confines of their traditional upbringing. And not all, they went through a period, each one of them recounts in her tale that she went through a period of introspection to contrast what she was raised in of her traditional religious culture or her social culture, because not all of them were Jewish. There were some who were more of a pagan. There was one who was a Roman, a daughter of a Roman centurion. So they all had their inner struggles to compare and contrast what Jesus was evoking in them of their true spiritual nature that was strong enough and motivating enough to help them look beyond what they had been trained or conditioned to believe and to give them their sense of their authentic power as women. The other thing that Jesus spoke to them about was the fact that there is a divine being who we might call the divine mother spirit, who is the complement of the Father God persona. She is the mother God, and she is the womb of consciousness in which we all live. And she is this large field of gathering and love and compassion and nurturing. And Jesus promoted that relationship of each woman to the Divine Mother so they could open up to the authentic purity and beauty of their femininity as daughters of God and learn how to be in that place, which was very appealing. It was very spiritually magnetic. And that type of dynamism drew a lot of people into the encampment where they were ministering to other women, children, the elderly, the infirm, and other people who were interested in what they were doing. So it was a very big departure for them to step out of the traditional role and to find their own inner authenticity and voice so that they could come together and learn how to collaborate with one another, not the way men collaborate, but the way that the Divine Mother was kind of holding a space for them to come together and learn how to cooperate with one another, each recognizing that the others had certain gifts. And there was like this beautiful soul harmony because they were all different, just as we are all different. But when we come together at a soul level, we each bring our higher authentic self, or what you might call more of our higher divine nature, into a situation, and then it works together in a much more harmonious and seamless manner, especially if the individual participants, like the women, were willing to let personal agendas or what we call the ego, let that go and let the spirit drive, which is what they were very good at doing because of their strong affinity toward Jesus and the ways in which he taught them how to spiritually minister to others to evoke a very strong healing response within each individual.
You know, that whole what you just shared with us is so expansive and so universal, and the Mother, Father, God, it just feels, if one contrasts it with what not only the early, you know, with now, uh, the uh, the patriarchal Christian and even Catholic churches, which are male dominated, and those patriarchal pictures, I can see that uh, the reality that Jesus was creating would, in contemporary Christianity, be considered heretical. I'm sorry to say that, but
Well, it's true. It goes against a very long legacy of theological doctrines and ideologies, and that's fine. If people want to stay there, I'm not impugning that at all. But this is a different dimensional aspect that is missing in our churches. Because when you look at the way the religions of this world are structured, the religious leaders, and I don't care if it's Christianity or Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, it's all based on, these are the beliefs that we hold true. And if you follow these beliefs, then you will be redeemed or, reach enlightenment. It's all about concepts. This is the way of the heart. It is not mindily what you might call or based on scholarly knowledge. It's based on experiencing the love that exists within each person that's kind of buried, that Jesus was able to reach into and draw out the soul integrity of a person. This is a highly advanced spiritual technique that is very important for us to develop now, because people are just so emotionally agitated because of the conditions of the planet, and we're still fighting about all these religious tenets, who's right, who's wrong. The churches teach you what to believe. They don't tell you how to access the spiritual potential within. And this is what the women were so skillful at achieving. And this is why they have wanted their story to be told, because now we are at a point in our planetary evolution where we can understand this in a more modern context now from an energetic standpoint, and look at the differences between how you approach something from the mind and how you approach something from the heart and soul. And this is very needed because people's hearts are hurting and they don't know who they are at a soul level. And Jesus wants his children of this world to recognize their intrinsic value and their soul worth. And we have a right to perceive this and to live in that state and to cultivate that. And this is one of the messages that the women want to bring back, is that everyone has a right to their divine dignity and to know who they are. And these are some of the questions of being human that we have long pondered and have not really been able to answer. It's not an intellectual thing. It's a spiritual knowing of who you are that Jesus evoked in these women. And then these women could then learn how he did that and evoke that in others. And it was a very simple technique. They listened to what people were saying, and they just held a space of love and compassion for a person to unburden themselves of their problems so that they could listen and receive the words that that person needed to hear that would validate them at a soul level and help them find their own divine dignity within themselves.
As you were just sharing this, I have to say that the word that appeared in my mind was both a renaissance and rebirth. It's as though this spirit that Jesus brought with the women, at his time, is now, and what you're articulating is a rebirth or a renaissance of that spirit. Do you have that feeling? Or
I do believe that we are in a spiritual renaissance, but I think we are in the early phases of this. And just like our artistic cultural renaissance, it was a period of around 200 years. And we're just in the very early stage of this return to the soul value that we have as sons and daughters of a creator, a loving creator. And it is a quickening type of thing. It's not something that you can necessarily know with your mind, but you can feel it in your heart and soul. And it renders a kind of an inner knowing of who you are and the value that you have as a human to participate in this great cosmic adventure of life. And it takes a person from just that place of intellectual understanding to that deeper inner place of recognizing I am worthy, I am lovable, I have a purpose, and I want to live that purpose to the best of my ability. And this is a way in which we have never been able to live as a planetary culture. And so we are in the early stages of helping people recognize that that is one of the purposes for human life. Everyone has a unique purpose. Not everyone is going to be a leader or a healer or a teacher or a great artist or a great leader. That doesn't matter. It's not a I'm better than you kind of thing, which is what we have in our current culture. It's very competitive. This is the harmonious blending of human nature so that we can all collaborate together and build a higher spiritual planetary culture, which we have never cultivated. We have never seriously attempted to cultivate that. We have never seriously attempted to cultivate our deep spiritual potential. And this is one of the factors of this book coming back to life, to help us open up to that model that these women spearheaded, so that modern spiritual leaders would be open to replicating that in their ministries in the different ways that they're being guided by spirit.
How are you hoping that there are different sectors that kind of jump to mind? You have, of course, the theological sector, all the theological seminaries and all those areas, and then you have the churches, and then you have the religious bodies, and then you have the readers, how and the plain folk out there. How are you hoping that, and the churches themselves, the hierarchies, how are you hoping that each of these will respond to this important knowledge that your book is bringing to the world of Jesus's 12 women apostles? How could you sort of like envision, give us some
Well, the
thoughts about
only
this?
thing I can really add to that is, I don't have a crystal ball to see into the future of how this is going to be received, because I would imagine that in some quarters it would be considered, like you said, heretical, or a flight of fancy, because this is a channeled work. I do feel that the model that they replicated of the soul-to-soul communication is a dynamic that will strengthen over time as we go through our spiritual rebirth and our spiritual quickening into the dynamics of who we are as spiritually awakened, enlivened human beings. And that this will replicate, I would say, more at a grassroots level rather than an institutional level. Institutions become very entrenched in their own belief systems, and it's more difficult to change the institutions than it is to change an individual heart or soul, and to open that soul up to who they really are. But this is I'll use the word magic, because it really does have this very beautiful quality of tapping into the mysteries of who we are as humans, and to bring out something that is so unique and transformative, that the more people who see that you can stay peaceful in this time of chaos, you can be loving when people are coming at you with anger and vitriol, you can be forgiving of those who have perpetuated such horrible crimes against humanity. This is a level of spiritual vitality that we have never achieved. But in replicating this model in smaller pockets of those individuals who are ready to resonate with the deeper spiritual meaning and value of their stories, then this can have a blossoming effect over time. But I don't think it's going to be something that we're going to see within the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to take a little bit longer for that to maybe even penetrate into some of the institutions. But you never know. I mean, I'm working on a spiritual timeline, and I don't have a crystal ball to see how this is going to play out. I just know that there has been a lot of resistance in certain quarters to this type of approach to a spiritual message, and that you have to judge the story on how it makes you feel. Does it have that spiritual resonance? And if a person is ready to really tap into the deeper meaning and value of what this book is here to portray, then I think it can have a very profound effect, and it can replicate out as people change their behaviors and become more loving and compassionate with one another, because that is where the good stuff, the spiritual energy, really does its best work.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me in reading the book was how different the roles of the 12 women apostles were from the men, number one, and number two, what a role the men played, especially after Jesus's crucifixion, after the troubles and the crucifixion, even the resurrection and subsequent, the Pentecost, what role the men, the disciples, and the apostles and figures like Paul played in the cover up and in the deviation away from Jesus's mission and from the mission of the women apostles, and that's why history doesn't know about them, is because the men covered it up. I may be oversimplifying it, and maybe you want to share a bit of that. I don't know.
I don't think it was intentional, but let's face it, at that time, in the social position of women as being relegated to second-class citizens, or even as chattel, it was very difficult for men to appreciate Jesus' teachings about the equality of men and women. The challenge is you cannot change such long ingrained belief systems in a single fell swoop. He did his best to empower these women. Paul had a misogynistic bent. Even the male apostles, it says in the Arantia book, agreed with Jesus in theory, but it was very hard for them to carry out that equality status of the female apostles in practice. And so they all did their best. And I don't think it was intentional or in any way means subversive. I just think there were so many factors and conditions of beliefs about who women were that it was very difficult for the male apostles to overcome that. And this is why this book has kind of sat in the ethers for 2,000 years, waiting for the time when women are now coming into the fore of leadership. But our leadership is not the same type of leadership as men. And this is one of the challenges of our time, is to recognize that men have their role to play in society and women have their role to play. They are not antagonistic, they are complemental, and they were designed to be harmonious. And one of the things we're seeing now is all of this different polarity, pitting men against women, gender against gender, ideology against ideology. We should be amalgamating, looking at the strengths of what men bring to a situation, what women bring to a situation, so we can all learn and grow together. But the scale of balance needs to be tipped for a while on the favor of women growing in their leadership, so it can reach a certain level of stabilization. And the problem that we're facing in our culture, I believe, is that women are still trying to compete with men and not understanding their true roles as the nurturers and the placeholders for the children, the next generation, to grow into strong, God-loving individuals, soul-affirmed individuals, knowing who they are at a deep level, so that the fatherly aspect can come in and help that child feel confident, worthy, valuable. The mother and the father have a role to play in the rearing of the children. They are different, but they are equal and they are harmonious. And this is a pattern that they want to bring back in understanding, helping the modern day women understand the true role of women as given to us in the divine pattern of the divine mother and the divine father, as the pattern personalities for male-female relationships. And this is another theme that they want to bring back into the book, that these women provided an environment for the other women around them to feel empowered in who they are, so they could be better women, better people overall. And so what we are seeing right now in our culture is getting back to some of those original plans and those original patterns for male-female relationships, so that we have a more balanced culture, planetary culture. We're very topsy-turvy right now. And it's time to right the ship, get us back in balance.
Right. We're a little more than about halfway through our allotted time, and you keep on saying things like "they want," and it's kind of this unknown audience, and it's as though there's an unseen presence, which is the they. Do you want to explain who the they are?
Yes, they are the 12 women. And in my contacts with them, which began in December of 1999, they had been contacting me over a period of these 23 some years to open up to more of this greater female dynamic of the role of women on the planet, because Jesus empowered them to be more of who they were designed to be as daughters of God, coming back into their authentic power. So one of the things that these 12 women, they, are encouraging us to do is to, well, first of all, read their stories and have a little bit of a better grasp of what they were able to promote here on the planet and leave as a pattern for spiritual healing to replicate throughout the different planetary cultures, just giving us a chance to return to a greater state of male-female balance. And so one of the things that I do believe the women are encouraging us to develop are these healing ministries that replicate the type of healing at the soul level that Jesus taught them to minister to those people who came for healing at all different levels. In the book, they talk about how they used the natural substances of the earth for healing and how they evoke the power of the Holy Spirit, the Divine Mother, to come into the substances to activate the healing properties that could resonate with the person's physical conditions and help bring about more balance. There are many things that they are encouraging us to develop. And the beauty of their collective natures is that when you read the stories, you kind of get a feeling of each woman, especially if you read it in a kind of like a heartfelt meditative space, and just let the power of their words, the authenticity of their words just resonate within and evoke something deep within a person to help that individual feel a deeper sense of their authentic self. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, and this is what I'm in the beginning process of developing, is a modern day 21st century women's evangelistic corps dedicated to Jesus and his original gospel and what he is helping us achieve as a planetary culture. That there would be a larger group of women who are interested in replicating this model in particular and going about the world and their business, helping people open up to this greater spiritual dynamic of the soul-to-soul communication with others, understanding the nature of the Divine Mother, and just returning to that simplistic approach to living faith in God as our creator, parent, and loving service to humanity. It's really very simple. We've made life so complex, and this is an attempt to kind of get us back down to some very spiritual, fundamental basics so we can live more authentic, happier, and purposeful lives.
As you became more in touch with not only the group of 12 women apostles, but each of the 12 women apostles, and you write about each of the 12 women apostles in the book, and I really was moved reading about each one, and they come from different social classes and different nationalities and races. Are there some that briefly now you'd just like to, jump out at you that are examples that you just briefly like to bring to the attention of the audience or introduce?
Sure. Yeah. Well, everyone is very familiar with Mary Magdalene. And I have to just preface this by saying, receiving the stories of these women and putting it into, receiving their words and putting in pen to paper, so to speak, was a very emotional experience. Because as their words were coming through, it was not only their words, it was their essence, who they were, their feelings, their emotions, especially the love that Jesus evoked in them. And there were times when I would just be crying, tears would be pouring down my face because I could feel that love that they had for Jesus and the love that he evoked in them, profound, deep love. Mary Magdalene was unique in the sense of she was, of course, the most famous, and there had been many accounts written about her. And she just kind of came in and set the story straight. When she talks about how Jesus, when she broke down the first time she was before Jesus, because there were two women who went into the brothels to minister to the women prostitutes and help them turn their lives around. And so Mary was very touched by those words and came out of that situation. But when she was introduced to Jesus, she just fell apart. She just completely fell apart. It was like everything that she had within her just fell away, and he shored up in her, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, this beautiful sense of her divine dignity and value. And there was no guilt or shame that she felt coming from him. There was no condemnation. And in receiving that, it was very, very powerful and very emotional, because she was really moving into that place of remembering what she experienced that moment that she was before Jesus, and she was stripped raw and naked, and there was not one bit of judgment against her. It was pure love.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it was a powerful experience. Now, some of them, and one of them, in the first one who came through, was a woman by the name of Kelta. She was a daughter of a Roman centurion, and boy, oh boy, was she a powerhouse. She was so feisty. She was just this, maybe it was her Roman inheritance, but she had this champion nature in her. And I remember the first time when I was ready to receive each individual woman, her name just kept coming through, and I kept seeing in my mind like Kelta, 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 like she was just jumping at the bit to get her story out about, how Jesus just changed her life and brought out this fierceness in her that was there, but she couldn't tap into it because her culture had just squashed her down. And she said, I didn't want to be a Roman wife and mother. I didn't want that. She said, I knew there was something in me, but not until I met Jesus did I know what that was. And he evoked that in her. He evoked her authentic self to come to life. So she was another one. There were a couple others who were extremely gentle and so, I'm not going to say passive, but very meek, very humble, very non-assuming. One of them was Rachel. She was very loquacious about her journey, but she was just very, very gentle. And in some of the stories, you can kind of feel their essence. So it was just this kind of like a beautiful mixture of fierce personalities, gentle personalities, different there was one called Nasanta, she was the daughter of a physician, so she had nothing to do with the Jewish tradition, and yet she came out of her training by her father's side, to administer unguents and oils, and she really approached Jesus from a completely different standpoint of the relief of physical suffering. So they were all very different, but somehow they formed together this greater unit where everyone had something to contribute. Nobody was better than the other. There was no hierarchical kind of like a social structure. They were all on equal footing. And one of the things that they also talked about is they really didn't do much squabbling. They learned kind of early on from Jesus' training that, you don't do that. You come together, you discuss your problems, you pray into spirit, and you focus on being better harmonized with one another. And I think this is a dynamic that they did a lot better than the male apostles, who tended to squabble with one another and still have that kind of like hierarchical dynamic as part of their own operating system. But the women really were able to have a better equal pairing and equal footing with one another. But they are all very beautiful, and I would imagine that as each person reads their account, that some women will strike them or resonate with them at a differently than some others would. So it's just a very individual experience.
Oh, that's so moving. Um, uh, what other sort of you have a way of sort of summarizing what overall the women's apostles' contribution to humanity's soul development and interaction here on Earth is. And I wondered if you could, share that for our audience. It involves words like simplicity. It's different from the men. Just so that I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, it's almost the difference between intellectualizing spiritual development through certain belief systems or rituals or practices or ceremonies into just going into a very sacred inner place of quiet inner reflection and letting the soul have a space to just breathe and open and relax. That the meditative healing environment that they created was one of a safe place where people could release their cares and their burdens. And we know that the human heart is heavy with emotions of sorrow and unworthiness and feelings of guilt and doubt. That is a heavy burden to bear upon the soul. The soul of humanity was meant to be free and to express the purposes and potential that have been seated in each individual by our Creator. And so this simplistic approach is more of an inner way of aligning yourself with your soul and sitting in a place and just being able to relax and receive the ministry of spirit. They were able to identify with the Holy Mother Spirit in a way that the men were not able to. As women, they were mothers. Most of them were mothers, not all of them. But being mothers, when you carry a child, you're holding that child in a very safe and sacred space for that little developing fetus to grow and to become strong and healthy. This is a metaphor for the spiritual growth process. That soul is a tiny, tender baby, and it needs that loving, nurturing environment in order to grow strong and healthy. And the demands on the human psyche of the intellectualization of certain beliefs, moving then into, well, if I don't do these things, I'm not worthy. This is all baggage that we carry. And the simplicity of their approach was just to listen to people, to give them a chance to unburden themselves so that they were in this dynamic of spiritual ministry where they were kind of like at a soul level, communing their soul with that person's soul and helping that person's soul kind of come back to life. This is a very advanced spiritual technique or approach that we do not yet really have very well developed on this planet. And what Jesus was able to evoke in these women was this ability, like Jesus mastered, of finding that place of deep value in a person, like the pearl of great price. He could feel that in a person and bring that out, help that person perceive that in himself or herself. And this is something that we, I believe, are in the process of learning how to develop through various spiritual healing techniques. And this is one of the things that the women want to bring back to life on the planet, because this is really when we're going to truly spiritually transform, when each individual begins to feel the intrinsic value of his and her own soul. And we're in that trajectory, but we have a little bit of a ways to go yet before that becomes much more regular practice.
Right. What has been the feedback so far that you've gotten from people in the say in the spiritual community and people in the liturgical or ecclesiastical community. I'm just very, very curious. And I know that it's early days, but this, I believe, is an historical book. It's the first book on Jesus' 12 women apostles. There's a research base to it in the sense that it's published in the Urantia book, which is, an objective revelation from a authentic divine source to the planet. And I just wondered if you have gotten a sense of how those worlds that you talk about are beginning to say, well, this is something that, are they aware even what is beginning to happen?
No, the book has only been out for a few short weeks.
Right. We're still in Women's History Month.
Well, yes, but I am not a marketer. I am not a promoter. So what I am doing with my ICC team of directors is developing a more aggressive outreach that will go into some of these quarters, but there'll be people helping me do that. The feedback that I have received from people who read like my advanced copy to get some of the endorsements were very positive. There were people who said this book absolutely changed their lives, giving them some profound spiritual experiences. But I don't have enough feedback from the short time that the book has been available to garner any real sense of how it is being received. And, a lot of times when people read a book, they can still read it at an intellectual level, but it has to penetrate down to that soul level. And it really depends on that individual and where he and she are in that process. I don't have enough feedback yet. And to be honest with you, will I get feedback? Right now, the book is only in ebook form, and we will be developing it as a print version.
Will you? Good.
Will be, yeah. Not for a few more months yet, but time will tell.
Yeah.
This is not my story, and I'm just a conduit. And there are higher forces that are disseminating where this receptivity will be best suited for people to read.
Right.
And I don't know where those quarters.
Well, yeah. I would encourage those, those who are gathering as a circle of support with you around the book in its various stages as an ebook and then as a soft cover or as a hardcover, as a print book, to look at getting into the various streams out there, in the same way that the apostles, the women apostles, I'm sure in their day, went out to the various streams out there. And I'm sure that interdimensionally, it's receiving a lot of help that way as well. But that to assume that there is a mission that accompanies the book, and and to enroll some friendly quote book marketing talent with you that can reach out into those areas. I would love to see, speaking tours and conferences and, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's start having all these talks now. I mean, I don't know. Over to you.
Well, I love it. And, from your lips to God's ears, I do think that will happen in time. But, this was kind of like a first seeding attempt. Get the book done. I sat on this material for 2 years.
Oh boy.
Information first came through over a period of year from, I think it was, we started, and I had a friend hold a space for me while I was receiving the information. And each woman came through in a short period of time, and we just kept adding their stories. So it took about a whole year from 2019 to 2020. And then we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I just kind of sat with it because I knew something else needed to happen, but I didn't know what, you know. And then it wasn't until last September of 2022, they kind of gave me a kick in the pants and said, you know, okay, now it's time to get the book out. So I got it ready with an editor, a dear friend, and who's also helping me market. So right now we're in the first seeding, you know, see how it does with this first seeding, see where we need to expand our efforts. So I'm just taking it one step at a time. And that's the way I've kind of come to approach these spiritual objectives that I've had at the ministry of the Institute of Christ Consciousness. I'm not following my agenda. I'm following the spiritual agenda, and I have to do these things, you know, with great patience, with faith and trust that the next step will be presented when the time is right. And it always is. You know, I didn't know when the book was going to be ready, but then they gave me this, you know, strong, yeah, it was almost like felt like a kick in the pants, a loving kick in the pants, you know, get the book out now. It's time. Not necessarily that it's going to be worldwide recognition, that may come later, but just to get it out there, you know, and so they can start spreading or preparing more receptivity for these stories. So time will tell, and we will see.
So now you mentioned the Institute of Christ Consciousness. So if people, you know, watching this, we're going to put the links, of course, in the article and in the description here, that people can just go and click and get the book. But verbally, where can people go to get the book now?
It's on the Institute Christ Consciousness.org website. InstituteChristConsciousness.org. There is no of, just Institute Christ Consciousness. And then I still have to put the picture of the book on the homepage so people can click on the homepage. If you scroll down, you'll see my other books and recordings page. It's under the resources tab at the higher part of the website on the homepage. And then there's the books and recordings link. And that book is the first one listed. So people can just click on the book and it'll take them to the page to make the purchase and then to get the download of the EPUB file. And I might just mention to your viewers, if you don't have a Kindle reader, you would need something that is compatible for either your Apple format or the PC format. You would need an e-reader for that. And, you know, there's a lot of those that are easily downloadable. But I want to tell people that because I've had some people tell me, well, how can I can't read the book. And you need an e-reader for that.
Yeah. I read it. I'm a Mac user, so I read it on my Apple books. Yeah. And so how can people reach you?
You can reach me at Donna at InstituteChristConsciousness.org. And look over the website. There's an awful lot of information about the spiritual growth process on there. And I've got my contact information up there. And then there's the books and recordings page under the resources tab. And tomorrow I'm going to get a picture of the book up on the homepage, so it'll be a lot easier for people to just click on that. But that's how you get the book. And it is not available on Amazon at this time. So you have to get it through my website. That's the only way right now.
So we really are present at the beginning.
Yep. This is the first attempt at the women sharing their story with the world in a modern day format. and it's very exciting. I'm very, very grateful and blessed to have brought this through. I mean, it really did change me.
Oh, it is so exciting.
It did just
It's
have
just
a
amazing.
profound impact on my life. And I hope that each person who reads this book has the same impactful experience and that it touches them in a very deep, soulful place.
I can attest to that. You can add me to the readers who said it. To me, it really, I mean, I was there. It really changed. It really had a transformative. I transformed reading through that book, and I can attest that. So there you go. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you had that type of experience. And that is the hope of this book, that it will touch people in a very deep, profound place and just help people begin to feel more loved inside, you know, because that is the greatest healing balm. And let's face it, this planet has had a dearth of love, you know, operating for many, many millennia. And it's time that we put down all of our conflicts and just return to that sacred place of our soul and learn to love each other and appreciate the differences and the diversity that we have as humans. But we recognize that we are all family in this beautiful, divine family of God. And that's the beauty of Jesus' gospel. Faith in our Creator, loving service in the family of humanity.
Thank you. Thank you profoundly, Donna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your beautiful listeners. And I hope that you will have a very profound experience with this book. God bless you. Thank you.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, that's the end of our broadcast, but it's the beginning of the journey of all of us who have partaken in your beautiful sharing today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Alfred, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And let's see what happens. I'll keep you posted. Byron and two of my board members are working together now.
Oh, excellent.
We're going to have our first meeting on Tuesday to kind of strategize how we need to get this book out there.
Oh, beautiful.
We are so underfunded right now in terms of, you know, marketing, that Byron is going to be helping spearhead.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, as they say, Godspeed.
Thank you. Thank
Godspeed.
you so much.
Okay.
And then you'll send me the link because I want to link this
yes,
to
my yes, I will.
Okay.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.